Hi, True Inner Work community. I'm talking about vulnerability today as per a request on my YouTube channel about what vulnerability really is. And the reason that Brene wrote many books like this, I thought it was just me daring greatly, rising strong, is to help people understand what vulnerability is and why it's important. So one of the questions that this subscriber was talking about, Deandra, hello. She says, I've learned a lot about vulnerability and how it's important in relationships and how she agrees that we need to be more vulnerable. But being vulnerable to every person in life is hard. It takes me a while to build trust with them. I guess it's easier to be vulnerable when we trust someone fully. Definitely trust is a factor. That maybe she's saying, like, I still don't understand a little bit about what vulnerability really is. So I've been through Brene Brown's Daring Greatly several different times now and really immersed myself in Brene's work. So I'd love to talk generally about how vulnerability shows up in my life and how I've seen it in the work that I do in authentic relating games, in circling, in my coaching, in my True Inner Work coaching, and how it is vitally important or a critical piece that we can't ignore if we want to be authentic. Connection, authenticity, vulnerability, trust, courage, they're all completely enmeshed together. Vulnerability, Brene Brown defines as risk, uncertainty, and emotional exposure. So it feels scary even reading that definition, right? Vulnerability is inherently risky because I'm putting myself out there. I'm opening myself up to hurt, right? There's the emotional exposure. I'm exposing myself. And then there's the uncertainty of, okay, I don't know what's real here. That's the unknown. And that's why I love Joseph Campbell's quote. I don't believe people are so much searching for the meaning of life as much as they're searching for the feeling of being fully alive. And the funny thing about that quote is the very thing that's going to help us feel the feeling that we want to feel, the feeling of being fully here and alive, is vulnerability. Because vulnerability says, I want vulnerability from everyone else, but it's the last thing I'm willing to be and offer myself. So vulnerability really inspires vulnerability in other people. Now, Brene also talks about oversharing. And I know that I've definitely done some of that as I've played around with, like, what am I willing to say and be and not, right? Being who we are sometimes takes testing things out, because when we really are honest with ourselves, we realize, wow, I don't know who I am beyond the programming, beyond the expectations that others have of me, beyond the idea that I think my mom and my dad want me to be in this certain way, or my friends expect me to go to this job, or my colleagues, and they expect me to show up and be happy every day, and all of these different little social pressures that add up to us living a life that's not true to ourselves. That's why I always repeat that quote. One of the top 5 regrets that we have before we die is, I wish that I had lived a life true to myself, not a lie that others expected of me. Now, why is that? Well, I'm not being vulnerable, because vulnerability is being pure. Vulnerability is the truth. It's the pure truth of who we are. And so the very freedom that we want too is the thing that we're most afraid of. Because if I am who I am without limiting myself just because of what other people think, it's not that I stop caring necessarily. It's not like I have to become a sociopath and stop caring about connection altogether. It's just that I don't let that limit me anymore. And that's a real freedom. So vulnerability is tied oftentimes to shame, which Brene Brown talks a lot about in her book as well. We often use terms like embarrassment, guilt, humiliation, and shame interchangeably. Shame is really this feeling of not enough. I'm afraid that if I am fully who I am, then I will be judged as not enough, as not measuring up, as not fitting in. And so this desire to belong has me keep those vulnerable parts of myself to myself. And that's why Brene wrote the book, The Gifts of Imperfection, right? Because the very things that we're most afraid to share are the things that make us who we are and that people want and need to hear. That's what I've seen a lot of in my coaching and in stories that people tell. The ones that we need to hear the most are the ones we tend to keep to ourselves. And so we all feel alone, even though we're all suffering from the same thing. And if there's one thing I've learned in working with so many people now, is we're all in some kind of pain, no matter how we look on the outside. Some of us are able to admit it a little easier than others, the pain that we're in, whatever kind of pain that is, psychological, emotional. So shame, we all have it. Shame is universal and one of the most primitive human emotions that we experience. The only people who don't experience shame lack the capacity for empathy and human connection. Here's your choice. Fess up to experiencing shame or admit that you're a sociopath. Quick note, this is the only time that shame seems like a good option. We're all afraid to talk about shame. The less we talk about shame, the more it has control over our lives. So shame thrives in secrecy, silence, and judgment. And that's part of the reasons why, pardon me, I have a runny nose today, we need to share our stories. And who has earned that right to hear that story that is so personal? In my book, The Power of Permission, I have permission to share shame, which I'm not going to get into right now because it is vulnerable and I don't want to tell the world about it in person right now. But I am sharing it with the world and hopefully will inspire others to do the same. But I want to wrap up all of these, connect vulnerability, authenticity, courage, and trust all together. And so, as Deandra, one of my subscribers here said, it takes a lot of trust in someone to be vulnerable, for sure. And so, sharing those vulnerabilities is like shining light on something that we've abandoned, we've avoided, we've distracted, we've numbed ourselves in really clever ways oftentimes, even through seemingly good things like exercise or, going after some kind of like passion of mine. It can be really clever ways of avoiding dealing with something. That was the same thing with me and the shame that I've experienced. Is I kept telling myself like, no, that's not really a thing. And then I realized me having to continually tell myself that told me that it is a thing. It is a thing that I'm scared to share. And I want to be able to share that first with those who have earned the right to hear it. So my very closest friends. And even then it's so hard because really it's us hearing the own words out of our own mouth that matters. It's less about other people. It's more about us making that judgment within ourselves okay. But vulnerability to me is necessary for authenticity. I can't be authentic if I'm not being vulnerable. Vulnerable doesn't mean that I have to go out and tell you some crazy secret story. Vulnerability just means, am I showing up willing to experience the depth of emotion available to me? The highs of joy, the lows of the lows. Am I willing to be hurt? Am I holding myself open? Because that's where connection comes into play. Connection is the energy that exists between people when they feel seen, heard, and valued. When they feel free to give and receive without judgment, and when they derive sustenance and strength from the relationship. That's how Brene Brown defines connection. And so you can see the walls are down in connection. And that's where I've had a really cool experience with people where I had thought that I was connected with other people, but I was really just having conversations with them. I wasn't really connecting with them. And I only found out that I wasn't really connecting when I experienced borders down. walls down. Nothing secret needed to be shared. It was just, oh, I'm here. I'm willing to see you as you are, and I'm allowing myself to be seen as I am without trying to be something, without trying to change something, right? That's the real key piece that I talk about a lot in the art of becoming is, when do I know to leave well enough alone? And sometimes in accepting ourselves, it's not just, can I accept who I am? It's, can I accept who I'm not? Maybe I'm not that person that I thought I wanted to be, or that I thought I could be. Maybe that's not me. And I think Gary Vaynerchuk's a really great example of that. Is some people would judge him to be blunt and abrasive, right? But he's realized that's who he is. And so he's honoring that. Whereas so many of us sacrifice who we are just to please other people. Let's read a little bit more about shame here. 12 shame categories. So these are all, in other words, ways that we can be vulnerable, or areas that we can be vulnerable. Appearance and body image, money and work, fatherhood, motherhood, family and parenting, mental and physical health, addiction, sex, aging, religion, surviving trauma, being stereotyped or labeled. Shame, give some great examples here. Shame is getting laid off and having to tell my pregnant wife. Shame is having someone ask me, when are you due, when I'm not pregnant. Shame is hiding the fact that I'm in recovery. Shame is bankruptcy. It's raging at my kids. It's not making partner. It's my husband leaving me for my next door neighbor. Shame is internet porn, is flunking out of school twice. It's hearing my parents fight through the wall and wondering if I'm the only one who feels afraid. All of these very normal occurrences in our life that we make wrong, that we judge as bad. And so Brene Brown makes the distinction between belonging and fitting in, and also guilt and shame. Shame is, I am bad. It's an identity. It's I'm taking this extremely personally, right? I didn't get the promotion. That means I'm stupid, right? And I'll call myself, I'm stupid, I'll say to myself. Versus guilt is, I did something bad. She says guilt is actually a positive emotion. So guilt is like, I didn't do what I needed to do in order to get that promotion. Dang, I should have really done that. I really wish I would have, right? I regret that. So guilt is a positive emotion in that if I use it to push me in the right direction, I'd be like, oh yeah, I learned my lesson now. This terrible feeling of guilt, I don't want that again. So I'm not going to let that happen again. So I recognized the behaviors was bad or wasn't ideal in what I wanted. And so I'm not a bad person. And then the difference between fitting in and belonging is, in fitting in, we change who we are in order to fit in, versus in belonging, we are who we are and accepted for that. So I'm curious what vulnerability means to you. To me, it really is an allowing of myself to be as I am. It starts at the level of acceptance, the level of, I'm not going to try and protect anyone in front of me or make them comfortable by thinking about what I should or shouldn't say. That's being vulnerable. Just being in the space. I don't even have to say anything. Vulnerability might be silence. That's why eye contact in silence for people is such a vulnerable thing, because we're so afraid of seeing and being seen. Nothing has to even be said in order for us to feel vulnerable or be vulnerable. That's really an energetic thing. And I run through an exercise sometimes with people where we do eye gazing in silence, and you're meeting the other person looking, and you close your eyes. And when you open up again, one person is seeing and the other person is being seen. And then you switch roles. And so what does it feel like to just be seeing? Usually it's more comfortable for people because they're not being seen. They're just like, okay, I'm looking at this person, right? And then all of a sudden the roles switch and it's like, whoa, I'm like being seen right now. And how much of me do I want to allow to be seen? There is like a surrendering that needs to happen in that process or in that way of being, really. So vulnerability is a scary word for a lot of people that I guess I've become more and more comfortable with and desensitized to, because I've talked about it a lot. The more authentic I am, the more I realize my vulnerability inspires other people's vulnerability. As Brene Brown talks in her TED Talk, she says it's called the power of vulnerability, right? We've perceived vulnerability to be weakness. That's why I have in my book, Permission to Cry, right? Especially for men, for women too, because we just don't accept people crying. We're like, what's wrong, right? You shouldn't be crying. That must be like bad. It's not acceptable. And for men, it's like, it's the sign of weakness, of you failed. You're not good enough. So much shame around a man crying, right? It's someone falling apart who's not supposed to fall apart. And so what this lack of vulnerability, lack of willingness to see and be seen and feeling has led to in our society is a repression and suppression of emotions to our own detriment. Everyone's being hurt, and no one has a space, or few people have space and time to hear and see each other, to express themselves. There's this, it is suppression of that natural creative expression that is completely unique to us. Again, doesn't have to be just in words, just in this beingness. That's why we don't see people as joyful as we know we all can be deep down, because I'm limiting myself. Why? Because I'm afraid. And what I'm afraid of is different for everyone. One of the big things that helped shift me that taught me that so many people are in pain, even though I already knew that, was this one particular person who I saw was very fit, seemed to be very knowledgeable about in their area of expertise, all of this stuff. One of those people that we might idolize even, right? Wow, that person's really got it together, right? And this person came and told me, and they said, I've tried to commit suicide twice this year. And I heard that and my mind was blown. As if that person has that experience, how many masks are we wearing? You know, when we introduce ourselves to each other, we should more say like, how are you? Like, shitty. How are you? I'm also shitty. I'm in pain. I'm hurting. I'm not being who I am. I'm not accomplishing what I want to in life. I feel not good enough in so many ways. I'm confused. I'm lost. I'm terrified, right? These are the stories I've heard, but that no one's talking about. We've had past traumas that have deeply scarred us. And we keep them in rather than say like, hey, yeah, actually, I'm having a not so good day today, right? But we don't know how to receive that from other people. And that's probably part of the issue too. And so in these authentic relating games and in circling, we teach new ways of being that allow us to be naturally vulnerable, that allow us to receive someone fully and completely as they are without trying to get them anywhere. That's huge. How often do you have a problem and people want to jump in and fix it, right? They want to give advice. They want to get you to where you're going. It's really making them uncomfortable more than anything. We've been programmed to fix people. And this idea that we need fixing has us feel like we're all broken, even though we're not. We have innate well-being and we're all whole and complete as we are, but we've forgotten that. So vulnerability opens us up to the possibility also that even though I'm whole and complete, I am also fallible and imperfect. Both are true. So I want to slow down here and check into Brene's book to see if you can find another good example for vulnerability before we wrap this up. Vulnerability, 206. Getting people to engage and take ownership wasn't about the telling, but about letting them come into the idea in a purpose-led way, and that her job was creating the space for others to perform. Oftentimes, this is referring to an example with a CEO where she was telling people what to do. She says, by definition, entrepreneurship is vulnerable. It's all about the ability to handle and manage uncertainty. There is no vision without vulnerability. Yeah, vulnerability, I love this point, is being a willingness to trust and to not plan. That's vulnerable. Right? To trust in the universe that I'm being led somewhere and I don't know where or why or how. That's vulnerable. Vulnerability is leaning to that edge of our comfort zone, leaning to the edge of uncertainty, going into that I don't know space. That's where all the magic happens, right? In that mystery, and learning to live in the mystery that is, rather than constantly worrying about trying to create safety and certainty for ourselves that is already here, right? We've created the illusion that we need to create safety and certainty for ourselves, even though abundance, safety, and certainty is what we're made up of. And by that, I mean, this is getting a little esoteric for some people. If I identify with the awareness that I am, then I understand that I am always home. I am always safe and secure. And I need not do anything to create that for myself. It's a really beautiful realization to sink into experientially versus in our head, because a lot of us that I know already know that in our head, but we're not living it. It's a big difference. Right? I trust, I feel a part of everything, I'm connected, and I'm not acting on that at all. So it's a matter of, well, do we actually believe in that? And how are my actions reflecting what I know? And that's when we move from realization to actualization. Actualization meaning I'm putting into practice what I know, versus realization, I've realized something that I have the potential to take action on if I want to. So it's oftentimes a new awareness that comes about that allows me more choice in my life. So, vulnerability. Yes, it takes time to build trust. And also, I like to challenge that and say, how quickly can we build trust? What does it take to really trust someone? Right? Can we create the container or the context for ourselves in order to trust someone? And I think what it really takes, I'm just coming to this now, is the way of being that or the energy that I put out automatically has people trust me. Now, why is that? Because I have relinquished, not completely, I don't particularly love the word relinquish, but because I have let go of a lot of the judgments I have of myself, I'm able to meet someone without judging them, because I don't judge myself. The less we judge ourselves, the less we're going to judge other people. The reason we're oftentimes afraid of being judged by others is because we judge so much and we project that assumption onto them. Well, they must be judging me in the same way. And so we shut down. So what does it take to trust? Trusting ourselves. Trusting ourselves first. This is one of the first agreements in authentic relating games is own and honor yourself. And when each person in a connection or relating experience does that, then that means I suddenly don't have to worry about what questions I ask you. You can be your own police, for instance, of your experience. But many of us kind of police each other's borders. And let me explain what I mean by that. I might not ask a specific question that I'm genuinely curious about to you because I'm afraid of it taking you somewhere that you don't want to go. But as an adult and as someone who is committed to owning each of our experiences, I'm committed to being like, this is genuinely what I'm curious about. So I'm going to ask that. And if this person doesn't want to answer that, they can just say, you know what, I'm really uncomfortable answering that right now. Great, there's a border. End of story. But a lot of us sometimes don't think or don't have the communication skills to kind of manage that arena or way of relating with each other. And we don't enter into a context with each other like that oftentimes, where we trust ourselves and each other enough to own our own experience. Yeah, I just separate that automatically with my hands. Please own your own experience. If you want to come to my birthday party, come for yourself because you want to, not for me. I don't want people there who want to be there just for me. I want people there who want to be there for themselves. But oftentimes there's these expectations of, you think I want you there and you feel guilty if you don't come, not just for birthday parties, for all of these social type events, right? So it's vulnerable, again, to say, I just don't feel like going right now. I like you and I kind of want to be there. At the same time, I don't feel like going. And then someone can either say like, great, I'm glad that you found that, or be like, wow, that really like hurts me. And then we'd be like, great, I'm glad that we both felt that, right? We're trying to protect each other from the uncomfortable emotions. Wow, it hurt me that you didn't want to come. And now I'm kind of pissed off. Cool. Good for you, right? End of story. Instead of withholding, we withhold instead of leaning into that edge. And what I've noticed about vulnerability is connection is always on the other side of an uncomfortable conversation. Always, 100% of the time, in every experience I've had, I feel more connected on the other side of a edgy conversation. And so usually one of those conversations where you just want to get up and leave, right? You're done. It's so hard to just stick in there and keep communicating, keep saying, this is where I'm at. I want to hear you. Part of me doesn't want to hear you, but I'm going to hear you anyways. I want to listen to understand, not to respond. I really want to get your world, right? It's so hard to say sometimes, so hard to get into that space. That's being vulnerable. So I hope that gives some people who are a little less familiar with vulnerability a sense of what it is or what it can be. Again, I'd love to hear personally from you, your maybe some horror stories of when you were vulnerable, or some beautiful connection stories of when you're vulnerable, or something that you still just don't get about it. I'd love to hear in the comments below. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll see you next time.